All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We are here at Hired Labs Coding Bootcamp. We're in week 4, so we are past the halfway mark. We're now on the back end of the course. We are into building our web application. This week is going to be dedicated to front end design and development. Um, and today we're going to be covering the real basics of front end stuff. We've talked a little bit and defined front end and back end loosely before, but I'm going to focus on a little bit more now. Front end is anything that users interact with really in your websites. So button placement, where you put search bars, where you put pictures, where you put text, how big that text is, the fonts, the styling, the colors, layout, all that stuff is front end. The user interactions, as they call it, UI, or user interface, I'm sorry, UI and user experience, UX. All those things are front end type concerns and front end design sort of things that you need to worry about and focus on. So like most of our classes, we're going to go through a couple of concepts about front end design, but this is not a design course. And I'm definitely going to caveat all this with telling you I am not an amazing front end designer. I know some concept of it, but I just don't have an eye for it, right? It's really not my thing. So I usually have someone else that's good at this design things, and then I can write the code for it. So the hands-on portion, after we do a little bit of theory kind of stuff, is going to be where to make the changes and implement front end design choices that you make in your design phase. So when we talk about design, though, I did want to reference the books I keep referencing over and over again: The Timeless Way of Building, the first one, and then the second one, A Pattern Language. In the second one, A Pattern Language, the author mentions, in addition to just like building off of the first book where he talks about space being treated as a whole for a design purpose, and then you differentiate that space by breaking it up within. You don't add things to it modularly, so you break it up on the inside and differentiate the space on the inside. When he talks about designing a specific design task, one of the concepts that I really want to bring up is that you start with some sort of design philosophy and some sort of general direction and pattern that you're going to follow for your design task. And that'll allow the structure just to be built straight up out of it, right? So that's really the idea there. And how that relates to our design here, when we're talking about web design and web application design, is we need to come up with some sort of general philosophy on how we're going to approach what we're going to do. And there's a number of ways to do this, but one of the things that's very important is taking into account the screen size. So I'm going to go over to our free resources here on the free coding resources. I'm going to show you a pretty cool thing that's in here that will help us kind of think about what screen sizes to design for, right? So I'm going to start by going to this screen resolution stats. It's over here in the references and documentation part. I'm going to open this up. And what this shows us is a whole bunch of usage stats. I'm going to scroll down towards the bottom. There's this thing that says mobile versus tablet versus desktop. And this is showing the number of users worldwide that are using different screen sizes. So the green line up here at the top is mobile screens, and then this is blue is desktop screens, and this is tablet screens, the purple line down here at the bottom. And the reason I'm showing this is when you establish your philosophy of design, one of the things that you have to decide, again, is the screen size. So if you take my entire screen here on the web browser that we're looking at that has, all of the things underneath the URL bar, so this whole page that I'm looking at, the stats counter page, this is the screen size that we're talking about. So right now I have it, my entire laptop screen size. So we'd consider that one of these desktop resolutions most likely. But we can approach design as either looking at this screen size first, the desktop screen, and putting all the things onto it that we want to on the larger screen. And then as the screen sizes get smaller, so users that are accessing our web application from a mobile site, we take functionality off of that page because they have a smaller screen to work with. So that's one philosophy, right? And that's called sometimes called graceful degradation. Graceful degradation is an idea in computer science where computers can keep operating and they don't crash when they're overloaded. They just kind of like slow down certain functionality within themselves so that the entire thing doesn't just lock up and stop. In terms of web design, graceful degradation is a whole screen size, the wider screen size with all kinds of buttons and pictures and stuff like that. And as it gets smaller, as the screen size gets smaller, the function of that web page or application degrades. Things disappear off of it. The opposite end of that philosophy is to start with what's called mobile first and to start with a smaller screen and design for that screen and then add things or make it larger as it gets bigger, right? So this site, this sort of thing, this reference thing is helpful to understand sort of who's using what and what number of people are using things. And as you can see, clearly it's trending towards more mobile use than desktop use. So, you may want to set your philosophy of design as mobile first and then move from there. Any general questions about this before we move on to other sort of conceptual ideas?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
Is that also where you make it iOS versus Droid friendly?
No, that's a really good question. No, this is not. So, like, what we're talking about in terms of web application is going to run in a web browser, even when it's mobile. So it'll run in a mobile browser. Um, so we're not going to worry about the operating system that the mobile device is actually running versus, iOS versus Android. That's if we wanted to develop like a native application for one of those platforms that we'd worry about, and we'd use a different sort of code set and deployment option than a web application entirely. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and then just a quick follow-up.
Sure.
Is the reason why some companies you can't view them, is it because they have to have a marriage with iOS or Droid, or is that just the coder just didn't do it?
So there's probably not one answer to that. It's like if you have trouble viewing it in a mobile browser, they may have designed it just for a desktop. And then if you try to access it on your mobile device, it doesn't load right and it looks wrong and it just says like, yeah, it doesn't work. So that's a possibility. It could be the type of browser you're using, right? There's a lot of if you go into like browser version market share down here, you can see which browsers are most used. So Chrome for Android is like one of the most used browsers, and Safari is kind of second. But people will tend to like develop their stuff for Chrome specifically, and then it works differently on Safari. So that might be what you're running into.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Good questions. Any other questions about this kind of stuff generally? All right. Cool. So to show some sort of examples and some other really useful tools that are available for this design process and when you're looking at things and trying to make your design decisions, I'm just going to go to a website and we're going to go, actually, let this open. We're just going to go to Meta's website. So Meta, that's the company that owns Facebook and Instagram, stuff like that, right? They do a number of things. This is their site. They're a tech company. They have, their logo up here in the upper left-hand corner with a little picture and their name. You can click on it. It probably takes you back to here. There's some navigation stuff at the top. There's this little quote here in the middle. And then you scroll down, you've got some videos and there's some ad stuff and there's some links throughout the whole place. And this is all fine and great. This is, a website. Nothing really amazing here. This is pretty standard stuff. What I want to show here though is if, a lot of you may already know this. If you right click on this and you hit inspect, then you can open up the developer panel over here on the right. And this is really, really handy for, again, when you're doing your design stuff and you're developing. So what this is showing us here, it defaults to this elements tab up here at the top, and it's showing us the HTML and CSS of this page right here. So here's the familiar doc type tag that we put in our HTML. Here's the HTML tag itself. Here's a head and the body tag. Just like we mentioned, we built in our own. And if I collapse that, this structure of Meta's page, and Meta's a gigantic company that employs all kinds of people, it's the same structure of the HTML page that we built last time. We have this doc type, HTML, head, body, and that's about it. But what's cool about this is we get to look in here and check out specific parts of this page. So let's say we want to find this little bit right here. I can get this highlighter tool, this little arrow with a box thing on it. And when I hover over stuff, you see that it shows the information about that. Highlighting, there's a little green part around the outside and a little blue part on the inside. And if I click on it, it'll highlight that section there for me over here in the elements. So I have this we believe in the future connection of the metaverse thing. And the other cool thing about here, if you've never done this before, you can play around with this. So you can change stuff here directly in the browser and you can make it, whatever you want. Pizza for everyone. All right, so when I hit enter, so I just changed the way that it shows on Meta's website. And again, if you've never done this, that's just to show you how easy this is, that you can change these things. I didn't just hack Meta's website. This is something anyone can do at any time in any browser. So if you get like a screenshot of somebody's website and it looks totally legit, you saw how easy that was and how fast that was to change. Don't just go believe in stuff that you see. But also to point out, just for like testing, developing purposes. This is a great tool to mess around with and see what things look like, get a sense of what Meta did, what they used, this is an H1 element, which again, we've used ourselves, what sorts of things they're writing in their HTML. And any designer I know that does product design professionally, that does any of these sorts of things for tech companies, they all approach this in what I like to call the Burger King approach. And if you don't know this story, there was a time when McDonald's was spending a whole ton of money on research on where to build their restaurants, and they're picking the best locations and doing a ton of market research. Then they go get their permits and they start building. And Burger King would just wait until they submitted their permits and then build one right across the street from McDonald's and spend no money on research. So bringing that to here, just go to somebody's site and look at the thing that they do and really emulate that site. Again, follow a site that you like. If you like Meta's site, you can structure yours in the same way for the way things go. And this will help you do that. It'll show you down here. If you haven't seen before, we're going to write some CSS today, but this also has the CSS down here under styles on this section. So you can see how they actually did what they did. And if you forget how to write CSS, it's got the syntax here. So you can be, familiar. We're going to be a little more familiar with this today. If that's something you haven't done before. This again, this is it in live action. Anybody know what CSS stands for off the top of their head? Nobody's got their video on, so I'm just going to assume that they were shaking our heads no. But right, so it stands for cascading style. Wait, somebody said something in the chat, maybe? Oh, cascading spreadsheets, close. Cascading style sheets, almost. Cascading style sheet, Yang, you almost had it. So, yes, cascading style sheets is what CSS stands for. Basically, again, the thing about it is to remember that it's the colors, the text, fonts, all that kind of stuff is really what your CSS is going to be doing. There are some really good resources, again, in our free coding resources that you could play around with these things specifically, like how things are spaced on the page. I really recommend going to the free code camp, the top one. There's a great responsive web development certification course thing that they've got that goes really hands-on with all these different elements of CSS and HTML and a little bit of JavaScript and whatnot to really understand these things. But the other thing, I guess, actually, before I go any further, any questions about this? What we're looking at, how we get here, why you would do this? No? Okay. Cool. So the other cool thing here is, we talked about screen sizes, is if you click this other little button up here next to the dotted thing, it's a little I guess it's actually two devices that they're trying to show. There's a laptop device and a mobile device. If you click on that over here on the left side, it'll change the way this screen looks. If you look up at the upper left, it says dimensions responsive. And then it has these two numbers. These are numbers of pixels. So this is 447 pixels wide by roughly 500 some pixels long. That's the idea. So these things are measured in pixels. And when it's in responsive, that means that it will move. You see the content changes based on the width of the screen as I drag this little bar thing in and out. And that's called responsiveness. When it changes the content responds to the size of the screen. So that's, again, a fairly standard thing to do on the internet. It's a very standard way to design modern web pages, is to make them responsive to different web sizes or screen sizes. But again, since you can do this, and we have all this information about different screen sizes and usages, how do you decide? If you decide you want to do mobile, what do you do from there? This gives us a cool set of like emulators or screen emulators for specific phone sizes. So like you say a Pixel 7, it'll automatically snap to that. It's no longer responsive that you drag. This is the dimensions, 412 by 915 pixels of the Pixel phone, right? And they have these things built in. You could see what it looks like on a Nest Hub. And then you could decide if you want to grab one of these smaller ones and then go from there and start designing out. It's really helpful. One caveat about this, if you're using this to design your websites and to design your apps, which again, I very, very much recommend this. There should be something you just have open when you're doing any sort of front-end development stuff. This is going to act a little bit differently. It's not an actual emulator. It's not really the way it's going to look on a mobile device, because mobile browsers function just a little bit differently. So Gloria, to your question, you don't have to be aware of which browser really they're using on a mobile device, But you do need to be aware that it's going to behave different on the actual screen with the touch screen and things like that. This in your browser doesn't really move and function the same way it's going to. So one thing, again, while we're doing what we're doing in Python Anywhere, since that's live on the internet, I definitely recommend you just go to your sites on your phone while you're developing, while you're messing around with them, and see what it looks like on a mobile screen. You'll do this too. Do this to your website as well while you're working on it, and use these things built into the browser. But keep in mind, it's not going to function exactly the same way. Like if you're trying to do the smooth scrolling, you really got to do that on your phone to see if it works the way that it does here. It may work differently. So that's something definitely to keep in mind. Any questions about this stuff? Screen sizes, how we get here, what we're looking at. Again, most importantly, why we are doing any of this. All right. So the last real kind of, I don't know, design philosophy concept that I want to get in before we get into hands-on stuff is that whenever you're designing something, whatever it is you're designing, keep in mind that it has to be fulfilling a certain purpose, right? So don't just pick a website because you think it looks cool and design it like that. If it doesn't fit your same purpose, then you may need to redesign things, right? So if you're not, say, a tech company exactly, you might want to design it somewhat differently, have things drawn, have people their eye drawn to a different spot. We use our website sort of as an example. This is very basic in a lot of ways, but the idea here was to make it easy for people to sign up. That's the reason for the design the way it is. And it draws your eye to the sign up button. That's the main thing that it draws you to. Then we made this darker than the stuff around it so that your eye would go there. And we moved away from our original website. Looked a little more, it was more laid out like this. It was more laid out like this sort of thing. And signing up was difficult, even though it looked a lot slicker than this does. So just keep that in mind, that when you're designing something, keep in mind the purpose, the end user, the people that are going to be actually interacting with this, and what it is they're going to be trying to do when they get to your site. All right. Pretty simple philosophical stuff today. Any questions about any of this before we move on to our hands-on practical application of front end, actual development parts?
So now what we were doing before was backend, no? Or am I confused?
No, absolutely not. That's a really good question. So the stuff we were doing before was, yeah, more back-end type stuff. It was actually infrastructure, if you want to get really, really, really hair splitting about it. So it was all the deploying and setting ourselves up to where we have our site on the internet.
Okay. So is this that we'll be doing today, is it building upon that, or could you do one without the other, or not one without the other, but one, does it matter the order in which you do it? So like,
that's a good question.
Do what we did first and then do this, or vice versa?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the steps that we're following are the order that you pretty much need to do these things in. The only real big differences are you might do these, instead of doing it in Python Anywhere, do it locally, but you're still going to run through the same steps of setting yourselves up, with a project directory, making a project in Django, making an applet in Django, and then routing the pages like we did last time. So you have some pages to actually do. And then now this is the part where we're going to take those pages and make them look like something. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool. So, so to catch up on where we left off and where we are, I'm gonna go over to this. I'm in Python Anywhere. This is my dashboard. I'm gonna go over to my web tab. I'm gonna keep my dashboard open still because I'm gonna come back to it. And then I'm just gonna open our website, or my version of it. I'm gonna close these other things because I don't need them. And so this is what we did last time. This is what we set ourselves up to this point where we have our homepage that is custom, but it doesn't look like much. So should equal to your question. This is required to get to this point to be able to make this look like something. You have to have a thing first, and then we can make it look pretty, right? So all the sort of back end plugging stuff in is required to get to the front end actual development, because otherwise you have no front end to use. So when we go next week into our back end design and development, that's going to be building our own databases and things like that, as opposed to the custom stuff that we used. This is going to be making this page and another page looking a little bit better than this, and how we make pages look different and look nice in the front end kind of user interface on this level of it. So does that make it clear for everybody what front and back end stuff is? Again, I'll make sure we're really clear on the why and the what before we move on to anything. So if you're not clear, raise your hand. All right. Cool. So if you're following along, I know some people I looked, first of all, anybody finish the full documentation last time, able to set up in a homepage and an about page? That was kind of like the challenge to do on your own that we didn't do in class last time. Anybody get that far? No? Okay. I know some people got pretty far and then they were like jammed up on different maybe misspellings or something like that. But the error logs for pretty much everybody that was following along that didn't, if they weren't able to finish the documentation from last time, the error logs definitely have your answer. So read those closely. But if you're stuck, reach out to me and we can sit down and talk it through. Okay, so last time what we left with was we had in our, go to our file structure here. We had made this homepage by, if we go again into our My Site directory, and then our to-do directory, which our application is in, we used views. Views is where we started, and we built our index here, right? So the challenge was, I'm gonna do this, we'll do this now. If you didn't do the about page, we're gonna need it today to link to have some sort of navigation between the two, right? So I'm gonna do that really quickly. This is like the second piece of the stuff. It was, I guess, counted as homework or something like that folks should have done on their own. But this pattern that we did last time, we're gonna do it again now, and we're gonna keep doing it throughout. It is a constant of this development process where we go to our views and we define a view. We're starting with functional views, so writing them in Python functions. So we define a view, and then we're going to go to our URLs and our urls.py. Remember, we mapped our URL, right? That's the second step. So our first step is we write a view, then we map our URL. Then who remembers what we do? What's the third thing after we map our URL that we did last time?
I think you went to the path
What's that?
or templates.
Yep. We got to make a template of some sort, right? Remember, we split using the Django kind of standards of a base HTML template that we're going to be doing a lot of stuff in today. That has our familiar doc, our HTML stuff that we just looked at. Again, it's the same structure that was on the Meta website. And we have our index, which is the one that is the third piece of routing something. So we do our views, right? So we write our view, we render, and we reference that template by name. And then we route our URLs and we give it a name that we use in our actual template, right? So here's our template, and this is the template that we're referencing. All right, so let's do that one more time for practice. And again, to kind of wrap up from last time, we're going to add another page because I also want to show navigating between. That's a really important front end thing to do. So we're going to go through this again and do an about page. So it's going to be very, very simple, just like the index page, but it's going to be an about page. So it's going to have somewhere else for us to go to do the interactions of moving between things from the front end. So that's going to be important. So this is very similar to exactly the same pattern actually as index. We're just going to do about. It's going to similarly handle a request. If you recall, the request is coming from the client, the browser is being sent, and there's a whole bunch of information in the request. There's a standard HTTP communication. And what we're going to do is take that request and render with some stuff from that request, a template of some sort. So in our case, about.html. Again, we don't have the template yet. We're going to go make it. But this is the exact same pattern that we did for our index. You just do it again, replacing the word index with about. Basically everywhere it is. You can copy and paste and just change the word index to about. That's totally fine. And that is in our to-do views.py. So my site to-do views.py directory. All we did was add a function for about that looks exactly like request, except has about in there. All right, so we're going to save that. And then next step is, okay, so we did views. What's the second step?
URL.
Map a URL. That's right. So we go to our same project level to do URLs. Remember, because we included those in our top level, so we don't have to go to the top level URLs. We do everything in our project. And in this URL patterns list, which remember is a comma separated list of items, right? We're going to add another path following the same pattern. So I'm just going to copy and paste it. There's, again, do this too. Copy and paste. Feel no shame in doing that. Now we just got to change this to about in the places that says index. So if you recall, the name that we use is something that we're going to reference in other places. I'm going to show you where we reference that here soon. And this is referencing back to our function in our views that we needed, right? There we go. Save that. So we set our path. Oh, one thing we need to do differently about this. So this part of the path in the very first thing that we did was a blank string, because that was, who recalls what this is? What are we calling the index if it's a blank string? If we think about it in terms of, I guess I could give you a hint, think about it in terms of a file structure, a Linux file structure, because the internet is a Linux file structure. So what is this first thing that we've called index if it's an empty string? Anybody? We're going to sit here until somebody answers. No, I'm joking. Okay. All right. So nobody got it. It's fine. It is the root. All right. And in internet terms, that's generally your domain. So for our cases, it's the username.pythonanymore.com, our root domain, right? Or in Linux file system terms, the root directory, right? So that is what we were talking about when we have a blank URL pattern. It's going to the root, the domain, the root domain, right? So what we need to do every time we make another pattern is we need to add something to that. So the idea here, if we think about our website as a site, index is here where the root is, and we want about to be at slash, well, remember admin was at slash admin. So we want about to be at slash about. So if I do that now and go here, it's going to say page not found, womp womp, doesn't work. This is what we tried, didn't work, couldn't find it. Right. So but that's the idea, is I want to make that URL at the top. So in my urls.py, that's what I have to just define here in this first part. Wait, no, not admin. That's one that exists. What am I doing here? About. God. Okay. So now I save that, and this should give us, Alex, yes, what's your question?
Yeah, when you're setting up the domain, do you have to put the slash at the end? About slash?
I don't know. I don't think you do.
Okay.
It might, I think it may automatically add that for you. Let's try it out. Let's see if this works. I think it'll work fine. But if it doesn't, then we'll come back and add the slash. It's a good question. It's a good question. But that's also why you gotta try these things out, right? So we put in our name. I feel we're not doing a slash, but I'm gonna do it without slash, and we'll test it out. Okay, so now we've done these things, and if we reload our server-side code, again, we just do that here without going back to our whole thing. Now that we've mapped our URL, what's the last thing that we need to do? I actually probably didn't need to reload my server-side code yet. What was the last thing that we need to do before it'll have a page to look at?
Did you already save it?
I saved it.
Do you have to make the about.html?
Yes, I have to make this template, right? So we've referenced the template, but we don't have a template yet, right? So if we go to our templates directory, we don't have one. So we just make one here. So we just do about.html. And I'm in my site templates directory. I'm just going to do it right here in new files, hit new file. It'll take me straight in there. And the about page is going to be very similar, almost exactly to the index page. We're not going to do anything crazy with it because, again, we don't have a real thing to talk about. So we're going to follow the same patterns, and this is mostly for practice, just to keep doing it. We're going to extend our base. What am I doing here? Our base template, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open and close my Django tag, which is the curly braces, the percent sign, curly bracket. And I do that so I don't forget to close it. Then we're going to use the word extends. I apparently have a typing impediment today. And then as a string, we're going to say which template we want to extend. So this tag at the top tells us that we're going to extend the base. This is, again, exactly like our index.html. And similarly to our index.html, we're going to put this block of content in there. Make sure that you spell these words correctly. So somebody had a misspelling. I'm not going to call out who. End block, make sure you spell end block right. These are reserved words, block and end block. Content is a variable name that you could pick, but again, that's what we have in our base.html. So it's got to be consistent throughout. So I'm just going to copy this whole block, end block situation and put it straight in my about. It's the same construction, except I'm going to change this to the about page, right? So this is, and I'm going to take still out because this is new, right? So this is the about page. This is it. This is all we need in our template to run. So now it should, following the same pattern that we did with index, go to our base.html, read this and say, okay, cool. We expect some sort of block. And then based on the URL, it'll either put in this content or that content. That's the concept here. All right. So now that we've got all that, we've saved everything. Now I'm going to reload the server-side code. I'm going to go check out our site, see if our about page works the way we expect it to. So we go here, refresh the browser. First of all, it's good the index didn't break, so we didn't destroy any of our stuff, which is nice. But now if I type in about, oh, doesn't work. Okay, so let's see if it is the slash that does it. That could be the situation. That's not the situation. We'll have to go figure out why we're missing the situation. And there we go. It is. All right. So, Alex, to answer your question, that slash is important. Now we all know because we experienced the failure together. Don't forget the trailing slash in your URL names, or else you saw what happened. The page broke. But now you can see that this is the about page. So we got it. We have it at this URL that we routed in our URLs through our views to point to our template. Any questions on that? That, again, is somewhat largely review from last time. So that shouldn't be huge amounts of news. But, again, I know we're moving quickly. So please ask questions if you have them. Any questions about that? Or is anybody really stuck somewhere that we might be able to help get unstuck? No? All right. Cool. So that brings us basically to the end of where we wanted to be totally from last time. That's if, everyone did the homework. And what we're going to do is spend a lot more time in our base.html, adjusting sort of the front end stuff and doing some more things in here. I guess before I go any further, one thing I should have done before we started, and I feel terrible not doing this, but we're going to need to have done this by the end. And this is something we should do at the beginning of every single day. I just got caught up in the review part of it. Is in our bash console, we need to make sure that we start out getting into our, it's called development environment, right? Get ready for that in case we need to do that. The first things we need to do are going to be in our files, like I just did. So I forgot about the bash console step, but for habit, we should all do this. In a bash console, we're starting in our home directory, right? We're going to initialize our virtual environment with the source command, source, the word source, all lowercase, space, name of your virtual environment, then bin and activate. You know what's on when you have it in the name of your virtual environment in parentheses next to your command line prompt. And then we're just going to change the directories into our top level my site directory. All right. So this is where we should be beginning of every class day, but we are going to do most of our work in our base.html file. So let's just go back to that. All right. So one of the things that we kind of talked about is the setting size of your web page or your web application, your website, to the screen that you're going to be, the users will be accessing it through, right? One of the ways that's done, and if you look back at that, I mean, pretty much any site, they're going to have a number of what are called meta tags, and these usually go in the head element. And one of those tags, really standard to use, that comes, not all the time with it, but this is included in what's called boilerplate HTML. You can find some really good boilerplate stuff. It'll have this kind of tag in there. So we're going to put this in manually, just kind of give you a sense of what sorts of things can go into these tags as attributes. And then we'll be using tag attributes a lot more. So up to now, we didn't include any attributes inside of these tags. We've just done tags themselves. But now before I close this meta tag, I'm going to add some things to it, right? So I'm going to add a name, and then I'm going to assign it with the equal sign. So the same way that we've assigned variables before or given keyword arguments. Think of these as like keyword type arguments. These are called attributes in HTML. But then they're always stored in a string with double quotation marks. In Python, it didn't matter if you used double or single. HTML, it matters. So we're going to use double. And we're going to call it viewport. And this is going to be the port through which people are viewing your site, right? And what we're going to say is the content. And then we're going to pass it a couple more inner parameters inside of this that say the width is going to be equal to, or set to, rather, sorry, device dash width. And then scale is going to be 1, meaning match the size of the viewport of the device that opens this up. So this right here is going to help our site be more responsive. It's like the first step towards it. We're not going to do a ton of responsiveness, but this is a good thing to just include in your site pretty much all the time. And anything that's in this head tag is not going to be visible, right? But it's going to affect the visibility. So we're going to use it a few times today to put things in here that we don't necessarily see, but we may see the result of, right? So we'll see that this fits the screen, but we may not notice it. It's not like a word on the screen or something like that. All that kind of stuff is going to go down here in the body. So any questions about that before we start adding our navigation? No? All right. Cool. So I'm going to save that just so that we're not going through too many unsaved changes. And then the first thing that we're going to do with our kind of front end development thing, a real standard piece that from the writing views, mapping URLs, and then making some sort of template on the front end of our page, we have to somehow navigate to those templates, right? Navigate to these URLs that we've made. And if you think about this, the analogy of the physical building that we're designing, or that we could be designing, when we go to my site and we type in the about page URL manually, think of that as like taking the stairs, right? You got to go upstairs, you got to walk up the stairs. We can get there. The about page exists. Think of it as like a second floor. It's there. We can get to it. But what we want to do is we want to put just some buttons that people can press and like an elevator just take you right there. So we're going to do that, real standard front end type stuff. And in our body, right above our block of content, we're going to add a navigation element. And so this, we're doing in the base.html template because we want it to be, think of it as like a top nav bar across the screen that's going to be on every page that you go to. So it's always there, right? So that it doesn't matter if it's the about page or the index page, the navigation at the top of the bar, the top of the page is going to stay there. That's why we're putting it in our base.html. Right. So the nav element is just going to be an opening tag NAV, closing tag NAV. And then on the inside of that, we're going to put our links. The way we do that is with an A tag, short for anchor. The anchor tags come standard with a couple of things. We usually include, at a minimum, you can put all kinds of stuff in them to affect their behavior and their look and stuff like that. But just get started. We're going to put a class. This is in here. This is called in HTML an attribute. It's not exactly like classes in Python because HTML is not a programming language, but it's similar in the sense that we're going to reuse them. And we'll talk a little bit more about them here when we do CSS. But for now, this is just generally referencing some preset design, look, feel kinds of things. And what I like doing with these sometimes is put button in here. BTN is built in for HTML class that you just use this and it'll function as a button like we want it to. The second thing that we put in here is called an href. This is a hyperlink reference. And this can be a link to anything. This could be, a link to Google. And if we leave it just like this and we close this off and on our site, we'd have a link to Google. That's not what we want to do, but this is how it's done. This is how you link to other things on your website. You can put any link in here you want to, any URL that you want to. For us, we're writing a navigation system within our page. So we want to navigate to the URLs that we have. So we want to navigate to our about page and our home page. This first button we're going to write is a way to navigate to our home page, right? So the way we do this in Django, we're going to use our Django language to reference our Django URLs, because that's where we're mapping them, is again through Django tags. These are going to be inside of our quotation marks. So we're going to do the open curly braces, percent signs, and then percent sign closing curly braces. I'm going to do all of that so I don't forget. And then the inside, I'm going to use a reserved word URL. This is telling Django, again, to look at our urls.py file. And then we need to tell it which URL to get. So this one, since we're going to be home, we need to get the index. So out of the things that we have and out of the code that we've written, who can tell me what this is referencing specifically? This word index right here. What is that pointed to? When the computer reads this file, what's it going to read when it reads this?
Index.html.
Not quite. It doesn't go straight to this. It doesn't go straight to the template itself. Where does it go first to find that template? It has to go basically backwards through what we built, right? To get to the template. So this right here points to this name in our urls.py. So on this base.html, when you say what URL you're going to, you're giving it the name from your urls.py. So whatever we named this here, if we named this something other than index, we have to reference it by that name. And then once we reference that, it will go here. The computer will read this part and be like, all right, cool. So I found the thing that says name, and it references this view in views.py, which will then render our template. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I got a question.
Sure.
Yeah, so what is the reason that you're kind of like going over different files?
Going over different.
Like, yeah, like for example, the URL index, right? And then you say you go to urls.py.
Yep.
And then after that, you go to views.py. And then after that, it goes to index.html.
Yep. That's what the computer is reading when it does this. So when you click on this button, that's basically what the computer is going to be doing. Is it's going to read these files in that order. So this reference is literally pointing at this file right here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but isn't putting everything in one file is easier?
Oh, I get what you're saying. Like all this stuff in one file all by itself. And just run that by itself. Yeah. So that's, that's fair. And that's a really good question. So some of these things could be in one just massive file. It would get really hard to keep track of. That is the main reason that we do any of this in different files, is that the project, the size that we're going to do, even the size that we're going to do, it would get to be way too much in one file if we did it that way. Right. So when we've only got one or two patterns and stuff like that, it may seem a little like, yeah, why are we doing this all in different files? But as soon as you do even just the 4 basic functions that we're going to do, it's going to make a lot of sense why we have these in different files. And then again, one application in a project is very rare. You usually have several applications. So there's like a lot of this, and it's one of the ways to keep it organized. So there is no like computer reason for a lot of these things. A lot of this is for humans to keep track of as well.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, I don't flip through all these pages to like confuse everybody and make it real like, hey, look at all these pages that we got. It's to kind of help you understand what is being routed and how we're doing this. But the why of it is, again, because this is how all the complexity is built, right? So imagine, you can think about YouTube is built with this same system that I'm showing you right now with the views, URLs, templates. They use Django. This would be gigantic at a place like that, right? It would be huge if it was all in one file. It'd be just like way impossible to keep track of and maintain with all the people that they got working on it. So breaking it out has a lot to do with the fact that this is made for projects to get scaled up to massive sizes. Any other questions about what we're doing with this URL reference here or anything else? All right, cool. So I'm going to close off this, we call an opening tag, right? So there's the first A tag, and then this text editor automatically fills in our closing tag with a slash and the name of the tag after it, right? So in between these two, in this space in here, this is where the text that appears on the screen is, just like we did up here with the title tag, like we did with our H1 tags. I will often, when I'm like routing my URLs and worried about where things are pointing, make sure I got templates and stuff, I'll forget to write anything in here. So this is where I'm gonna put the word home to let us know that this is going to the home page. If you forget to write something here, you'll be banging your head against the wall sometimes looking at a blank page with no link on it that doesn't say anything, and it'll be really annoying. And it's just because you forgot to put in some sort of text in there to see it on the screen. All right, so this is a fully formed, what they call a tag. And this is going to be a link, just like these links are here. You see these links up here at the top that say home and Higher Labs, all these things we've been using to navigate around Python Anywhere. These are a tags. All these things with the underline blue. That's what these are going to look like for the most part. So what I'm going to do here before we move on and test this is I'm just going to make our other navigation button to our about page by just copying that home a tag and just changing index to about in the URL reference. And then this just telling us that it's going to the about page. So that's all we got to do. Other than that, it's exactly the same. It's button class. The construction of the href is the same. It's just referencing a different URL. So I'm going to save this. When I reload it on the server side, what should happen, if we didn't destroy anything or do anything weird, is taking this long to load doesn't make me feel good about it. But when we go back to our site, we refresh it, we should have a couple of links up here at the top. Our page still looks really basic, but we have a couple of navigation links up here at the top. One says home, one says about. And now if we click on this home, it should take us to the index, which it did. And then we can see up here, we're at our base URL. And if we click the about page, that goes to the about URL, and we're on the about page. So that is basic navigation and how it is done with a tags in HTML, routing the URLs with Django. Any questions about that before we move into styles? Yes.
I did write down a text inside the nav. Well, what do you call that? Nav. What is it called?
Yeah, this element. Yeah.
Yeah, element inside the nav element, and then I just wrote like a basic text on top of the a tag, and it still shows on the website.
Oh, like this?
Yeah. And then I refresh the page, and it still shows on my website.
Yeah, it still will. When it does, though, see, it's just going to be all kind of blah.
Yeah.
You know, you're not gonna be able to format that with stuff. See, it's not all bold like this one is. But yeah, that'll work. I mean, you can just write directly into your HTML and it'll pop out as plain text. Where's my base go again? Yeah, you could do that and it'll pop up kind of wherever you want to. So yeah, definitely.
That's not the proper way, right?
No, that's not the proper way. That's definitely not the way. If you want to get text to show up, and I'll show you why, right? So we'll show you why when we start doing our styling. The best way if you want to put just text up on a screen is to use a p tag, it's short for paragraph, and then do this, put it inside of a tag, because that way you can set the styles and everything to this tag, which we're going to do here in a second, which you won't be able to do if it's just plain text out here on the page. But this will look with no styles on it. I think it'll look just about the same as if you just wrote it directly in. So yeah, although possible, good question. Although you can do it, it's not the best move. It'll get text up on your page quickly, but you won't be able to do much with it. So let me just refresh this. See, so it changed it a little bit. So it gave it some different spacing up here by wrapping it in that paragraph tag. But it, the text font looks all the same. But then again, it's gonna be treated differently by the browser, and it'll behave more like we want it to on a web page if we wrap it in these things. And then we can do the styling that we're about to do on it if we do it like this. So good question though. I like that. Any other questions? And again, it doesn't have to be specifically about something we talk about like that. If you just tried something and you're like, hey, it just did a thing. That's a good question too. No? All right. Let's move on. Cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to set some colors. So we're going to show some styling and some ways to do that. And the first way we're going to do that, I've mentioned a couple of times CSS, cascading style sheet, and that being the way we do colors and fonts. And we'll get to that very soon. But I want to show that you can do it directly in HTML. And this is also kind of to show why CSS exists. And this is hopefully to draw logically why things need to be broken out, again, for sake of complexity and growing projects, and the fact that you're going to write a lot of stuff to even do something pretty simple. You're going to end up writing a lot of different things in here, and breaking it out is going to help do that. So the first way that we can set styles, say colors, fonts, those sorts of things, is with these attributes like we did already. So we could do what's called inline styling. So inside of a tag, pretty much any tag we want to, we could change the style of that tag by just giving direct input as attributes. So I'm going to take this body tag, which, if you recall, again, it's like the entire page. Basically, it's where all the content is in our page. And I'm going to set some attributes to it and change something, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the background color. And the way we do this when we do it in HTML, this isn't CSS yet, this is straight HTML, is we use BG color is the attribute that we use for background. And then we can just put a color in there, like just a word for a color. So we can put blue, and we'll show that this works, even though it's probably going to look nasty because it's going to be a blue page. But it's quite literally that simple. You say what attribute you want to change, and then you give it a color. And there's our lovely blue site. So the way we did this, again, is we just called out the attribute we wanted to set, and then we gave it a color. Now, another way we can do colors besides words, because that's a little bit clunky. Like I say, you want to get a particular shade of blue, kind of blue. You know, you're not doing like a third grade art project and you want to get some more complex colors. I meant to get this open. Let's get back into our free coding resources. And in our free coding resources, there's a really cool little kind of cheat sheet for CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. So kind of are the three horsemen of web development. Let's call this HTML cheat sheet. When we go to this, it has a whole bunch of cool stuff. So this has special characters, if you want to write those in there. It's got, you know, emojis and all that kind of stuff. But I'm going to look right here in this color picker right here in the middle. And if you click on any of these colors, it's going to take us to another spot, which is okay. We're not worried about that. This is what we want it to do. And so it's going to give us this. And this thing, if we choose some sort of color off of this, it'll give us a whole bunch of these values down here at the bottom. So it says electric green's got the name, and then it's got this hashtag, and then 00FF00, or RGB, which stands for red, green, and blue. And those are the values out of 255 that it can be. And you can express those red, green, and blue numbers in different values. You could do cyan, magenta, yellow, and this K it means black, but is for from printing. It actually stands for key, but they mean black. This is like a subtractive way of doing it. So this is like what printers use when you're printing something out physically. And you can put it in as hue, saturation, and value, right? So all of these ways of putting in this electric green color are acceptable. You could use all of these, any of these. Now, what I tend to use is these hex values up here, these hexadecimal values that come with the hashtag and then 0FF00, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use those. And this is going to give us, again, a way to sort of fine tune. Instead of just saying blue, we can choose a specific kind of blue, right? You see all these blues are slightly different. See, even if I hover over them, the hash value changes. This is, you know, hashtag 19FFFFF, and this is 19FFD9, right? So this is a much more refined way of choosing the color that you want to use, even though we're just going to choose some stupid looking color for now to show that it's different and we want it to be a stark difference. So I'm just going to copy this 00FF00, even though it's simple enough, I could probably write it by hand. And in place of my blue, the word blue right here, I'm just going to put that value. So the hashtag included. So hashtag 00FF00. I'm going to save this. I'm going to refresh my server-side code. Reloaded, sorry. I just misused refresh and reload. And then when that's done reloading, I'll refresh the browser, and this should change from this really simple blue to a really ugly green. So again, not a design class. I'm not going to try to convince anybody that you should make your site this color, but this is how you change colors. And this is a little bit more refined way of doing it than just putting in a color word. But you can set these styles directly in line with HTML using these values. Any questions about this? right, so on this cheat sheet, there's all kinds of great stuff. It's got, tags. It's got some more things you can do if you want to put images in there. Got some ways you can adjust your text and stuff like that. So definitely worth looking at. But this is generally speaking where you're going to put those values. You're going to be looking at one of those cheat sheet things, and you'll be putting those values in here in line if it's HTML. So what we're going to do now is start using CSS. CSS is it's technically a different language. It's got a different way of writing, but it's not vastly different. It's not a ton of different syntax to learn, and it's not really all that difficult. It's actually really simple. But for the same reason that we have things in other files, we use things like CSS so that we're not putting in, say, if we wanted to change the color here and the text color and the font and several attributes, this could get pretty long, right? And let's say we wanted to do it on a couple of different elements and change them a little bit. We wouldn't want to have to write this. Like, let's say we want to do some styling on these A tags. We want to have to write all these things out if we had 6, 7 things on each one and write it 14 times, right? So one of the reasons that we compile these up and put it into another language is so that it, as our program expands, as our application expands, it gets more complicated. We can put more styling into it and save space. It's easier to maintain, easier to read, less redundancy. So let's look at that by refactoring this to keep the same background color for now, but we'll just move it up into CSS. So we'll move it out of this inline styling into a CSS style tag. To do that, we're going to go up to our head element, and we're going to use the HTML style tag. I'm just going to write the word style inside an HTML tag, and I'm going to let the text editor close it off for me. Then inside of the style tag, I'm going to start writing CSS. So this thing will expect CSS inside of it, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to basically specify what element we want to set the style of. That's the first thing in CSS. You just name the thing that you want to use. So you can grab a thing by its name, like we can use body, we can use nav, we can use head, we use HTML. Doesn't matter. You can take any of these things, and that's what we're going to start with. And we're going to use body because we're refactoring. So we're going to do the same thing, but up here. So when I type the word body in CSS, it's a known reserved tag word. So it comes up red. You can see that on your side. And then we're going to use one space, and we're going to open, I'm just going to go ahead and close it, curly brackets. This is how you set the styles in CSS, is between curly brackets. And you're going to do it in a very familiar set of key value pairs separated by a colon. So this is going to look pretty familiar. This thing that we're setting is going to be called background color, a little bit more explicitly than the BG color from HTML that we use down here. So it's spelled out background dash color, all lowercase, and then colon. And I'm just going to copy this same hex value because it takes hex, takes the same words, takes the same values that HTML would reach down here. And I'm going to put it in front of this semicolon. So the semicolon is what tells CSS this line is finished. And then we can add other things in here if we wanted to. If we want to do like text color or something like that, we could. And we could add something like that or whatever they call it in here. I think it may just be text. But now we can add however many we want, and it should run largely the same way. I'm going to take out this HTML tag from here. So we have just our body tag. And I'm going to let the style up here reference it using this reference. All right, everybody tracking what we did so far? Any questions about that and how that got done? And why we did that?
If you try to put the text color, do you put the semicolon?
Yes.
At the end of the background color?
Yeah. So if there's any other attributes that you want to add to it, like I think text align maybe is a thing. Yeah, text align. You just add another key value pair with the key being here on the left, colon, and then the value, and then a semicolon at the end. And then you can just add just like a dictionary, just add as many of these as you want to.
Okay, so pretty much every line has a semicolon at the end.
Yep, it ends in a semicolon. And generally speaking, we move this over. We're going to move this over into a different file because that's, again, very standard. I'm going to show you how to do that. It's fairly straightforward. But generally speaking, with all these markup languages and the styling languages and stuff like that, these spacings don't matter like they did in Python. because all this is just going to be collapsed down to like one line and read really quickly like that. But it does have more of these things that are relevant, right? Like this semicolon really does tell the interpreter that this is the end of the attribute that you wanted to set in CSS. So you got to have those there. And these things really tell it that it's, you know, contained here. So you got to have it. It's as important as the spacing was in Python. Any other questions? All right, cool. So I'm going to make sure that this was, in fact, this is refactoring that we expected it to be, since we moved this color definition out of the body tag itself and have just referenced it within this style tag using CSS. It should look exactly the same as it did. So if we recall, it's, you know, this little preview up here. Let that reload for a second. Our site is this nasty green color. When I refresh it, if we didn't break anything, it'll look exactly the same. So it's still the nasty green color. We didn't change anything. So that is a successful refactoring of our styling into CSS. Now that's all fine and great, but there are much better ways to set your styles, right? Instead of just calling a whole tag, right? Like, so this is an A tag and this is an A tag. What if you want to style these two things differently? And you don't want to just call this, you know, assign it to an A tag. There are two ways to do that in CSS. One is with what's called classes, which we're seeing down here, class. Another way is with IDs. Now, classes are way more frequently used. So when we use those first, I want to talk about those a little bit. IDs are very, very similar looking, but they're less often used. And we'll talk about why that is as we do them. But let's start with classes. So we're going to define a class, just like this is a button class that's defined someplace. Doesn't matter where. It comes standard, no big deal. We're going to define a class, and we're going to set its color like this, right? So instead of writing a new one, I'm just going to change this declaration right here where it says body. Right now, we're referencing a specific body tag. I'm just going to change that to our class definition. And the way you do a class in CSS is you start with a period. So the period tells us that this is a class. And then we can give it any name we want to. So this is basically a variable name. I'm going to give it something descriptive so we know exactly what it is we can expect out of this class. So we change the body call here. It said body before. Now I change it to dot green dash background, all lowercase. And if we want to keep it exactly how we had it, we could put that class on the body. Just remember we have our, oh, gotta put this in quotation marks. All right, so we can reference our green background class by just calling it directly. Notice there's no period at the beginning of this when we call it, right? So we just use the word class, the equal sign to say is, and then green background as a string. So a class name that we set it, whatever you set the class name to be. And we save this again, since it's just refactoring, it should look exactly the same. So we didn't do anything differently with it. We just put the class on the body tag instead of calling the body tag directly. So I'm going to let that load. I'm going to show that it didn't change anything, show that it works exactly the same way. Cool. So it worked the same way it did. Now, what we're going to do is use in more realistic terms. Like, we're probably not going to apply this to the whole thing. Let's move this to just one of these A tags, right? And just turn this one green. And so we can add this to the class that already exists by just putting inside of the string. So just a space after BTN inside the string. I'm just going to add another class to it. So green background. So now my one A tag has two classes, two class definition. The second one doesn't, right? So now when I reload this to my server side and refresh my browser, it should change from the whole page being green to just the background of that one button being green. See, there we go. All right, so now you can see up here the home. Zoom in a little bit so it's easier to see. Just the home button is green. They still function the same way, but the background is green on this one. So let's say I want to use it for all my buttons. I can just use that again, say green background. Save it, reload. And then refresh. Now we got both the A tags have the green background. So that's how classes are used. You could take classes, assign whatever styling you want to the class, and then assign that class to one or more elements on your page, however many elements you want to do it to. That's what classes are for. So they're reusable sets of style that you can assign to elements on your page. Any questions about that? All right, cool. So the other way to set a specific thing, a specific set of styles, is using what's called an ID in CSS. These are a little less frequently used because you're only going to use it for one thing, right? So just one thing on the page. Classes where you're going to use over and over again, IDs are typically just for one thing, right? So it's not as frequent that you run into them. But to be complete and talk about how you do this, we'll show the syntax of it, right? So the only difference between this and anything else in CSS is that it starts with a hashtag. So we're going to give this, just as an example, main background, because we're just going to give this to one thing. I'm just going to give it to the body tag for this. And we'll just say that the background color, and we'll just make it blue again because that's, it's a great color. All right, so now we have what's called an ID with this hashtag, and that's what tells CSS this is an ID. This dot tells us a class, right? So ID is only going to be used on one element. So we're just going to use it once. So you can have several IDs if you want to, used throughout, but each ID should only be on one thing. So we're going to put this on main, background, and it's going to function largely the same way that we've seen everything else function. You're not going to put several in here. Let's reload our server side. Again, we're just going to use this on one thing and one thing only. But it operates very similarly. Any questions about that? Any questions about classes, IDs, CSS in general? All right, y'all got to keep it down, man. You're way too loud. I can't get anything done over here.
I was just gonna say this is the fun stuff.
Then this is funny because this is my least favorite part of all the coding. I hate front end stuff. So I'm glad somebody likes it. That's why teams are better to operate, right? It's way better. If it was all up to me, I'd never do front end. But all right. So if no questions, we will move on to our last kind of refactoring of this. And this is going to move everything out into a separate CSS file. And we're going to run, again, our collect static. And the reason we're going to do this is, again, it's standard to set these things up in separate files, have your own static file directories and whatnot for pretty much any project. Even small projects, you're going to have this similar setup. And I really want to make sure we understand what is happening when we run our collect static command and how that influences what is being served on the page at the end, right? So if no other questions, let's step through that on making our CSS file and moving this CSS that we just wrote here into that file. This is going to be really, really straightforward. So what we're going to start with is making our actual file. And I'm going to do this in my Bash console because it's a lot faster. You could do this in the GUI if you like, but make sure that you get the directories in the right places and you get the file set up in the right places. But I'm going to be explicit about where they are, so you can just follow this along. So we're going to use our mkdir, our make directory command here in Linux in the command line. And I'm going to tell it what directory to make. So I'm going to give it the full my site, so tilde/my site/, and then I'm going to give it the name of the directory I want to create, which is going to be static. So the top level, there's going to be a static directory that we're making. And this is a place for us to store our own static files that we will collect into our main static directory. Now, inside of this directory, I'm going to make yet another directory. We could pass mkdir. We don't have to call it a second time. We just pass another argument. So I put tilde/my site/static/ and then a space, and then tilde/my site/static. So within that folder that we made in the first call, we're going to make another directory called styles. Right? So we got my site, static, styles is the ultimate directory we need to make. So there's two directories need to get made. I'm going to hit double ampersand, so and. This just means in Linux terms that it's going to execute this first command, and then it will do the next command that I'm going to give it. So I'm going to create a file in that directory that I just made using touch. So I'm going to say touch, give the directory my site, static styles, and then the name of the directory we want to use. So it's going to be main-styles.css. Right, so this is going to be our main styles. Alex, what's the question?
Yeah, I was following you, and then after the NN, I put enter.
Oh, you
I
hit
thought
enter.
you went to the next line.
No, yeah, sorry, man. This wraps around automatically. I should have called that out. Yeah, no, I have not hit enter yet. This is all one line of command. I haven't hit enter yet at all.
Okay, so now I think I got a single arrow instead of V and D.
Okay, so it's just expecting another command. So you can either just hit C to exit out of that to make sure you get right back to the spot where you expect it to be, or you could try typing the second piece of the command, this touch command, and try it from there. But either way should get you out of there. Like this first part of the command should have happened, and then it just kind of left hanging with the and. It's like, okay, and what? So you probably have your directories. If you want to stop now, hit Control C and go and check to see if you got those directories before you make the file. Feel free. But yeah, haven't hit enter yet, but I'm about to, right? So now I've written the directories I want to make, double ampersands, touch, my site static. Again, you could do this through GUI if you want to. This is just kind of like using those commands we did before. It's not going to give me any feedback that I did it. But if we go back to our GUI, we go to my site, we now see we have a static directory here. And again, you just make these directories by writing the names up here if you like. We have our styles directory. Then inside we have our main styles.css. Again, you could use these things if you prefer. Just make sure that you have a username, my site, static styles. This is the directory that you want to have your main-styles.css in. All right, so we're the top level project. We have a static directory, styles. And if you recall, in our settings.py file, we set our static directory to be called static. That's why we're naming it this, right? So it's all kind of coming together. All right, so in our main.css, not a lot to do in here. We're just going to go, oh, I closed the about, didn't I? Of all things. Okay. In our base template, we're just going to take out this that we wrote, right? So our CSS that we wrote, I'm just going to Control X to cut that out. And I'm just going to paste it into our main styles.css. You see it comes out all wonky. And again, I'm just going to adjust this so it's human readable, a little bit cleaner. The computer doesn't care about any of this formatting. None of this is going to break it. This is just for people to be able to read a little bit better and follow the command that we expect it to follow. But yes, Alex, what do you got?
Yeah, so I did try to make the directory, but it says file exists. Cannot create directory.
Oh, okay. So maybe that already, maybe you did make it in the first command. So it probably is already there. Go check in your GUI, man. See if you have it already here. If you already got static and styles, then just make sure you have this thing built in there. And work
So it's
line.
my site and static, right?
Nope, just my site, one my site. No two my sites. Just my site, then static. Yep. Then styles.
Yeah, I have the stars folder, but I don't have the main stars.css. Should I make it in the GUI?
Yeah. Go ahead and make it in the GUI. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what I assumed. I think the first command worked because it made these directories. And then when you just hit the double ampersands, it just didn't get to this part yet. So yeah, just go ahead and make that in the GUI and then just copy paste or cut and paste from your base the CSS that we wrote over there to have our background color and our green background. All right, cool. So once we've taken that out, then we don't really need this style tag anymore. It's not doing anything for us. So we're going to take it out. But in the head tag, what we need to do now is we need to somehow connect our pages together, right? So this right now, if we save this and we load it and we run it again, on our my site, we have all these colors and all the stuff that we did in the CSS. We've now moved that over into a different file. So it's not going to work. It's all those styles disappeared. So we no longer have those. So what we need to do is we need to tell this page where those styles are now. The first piece to that is inside the head tag, we're going to add a tag called link. It's very often used. We're going to use this a couple more times to do more things. But keep in mind that we're doing this in the head tag at the top, right? So keep in mind our sequential control structure, which means that the computer is going to read top to bottom, left to right, starting up here as fast as it can, right? So the order that you put things in this page, on the page top to bottom, the spacing doesn't really matter, but the order in which you put things does matter, right? So when we do these style sheets, a lot of our JavaScript stuff, it matters where you put it. A lot of times you put it in the head. Sometimes you got to put it below the body, something like that. Style sheets come first, though. Usually you put style sheets, and this stuff's going to load a little bit before the rest of the page. That's why you want them, because if you want your styles to come out when the page loads, you need to know what the styles are before the page gets loaded. All right, so in our head tag, we're going to do a link tag, and then we're going to use the REL, stands for the relationship. We're going to tell it what kind of relationship this is, this attribute REL. So we need equal sign, which stands for is, and we'll tell it that's a style sheet. So all lowercase, like we do with any other attribute as a string. And then we're going to give it another attribute of type, all lowercase. Say the type is text/CSS, so it knows what kind of type to expect. And then like we have done with our A tags, we're going to give it an href. Href. And we're going to set that to, we have before string, using Django's template language to route our URLs and point to where we want it to be. So this isn't a URL we're routing. So this isn't something that we need to show anybody or anyone's going to navigate to directly. This is just for our systems to understand where to get the styles from, where the styles are listed, what they are, right? So we're going to use another word called static, just static by itself. And then we're going to give a path to our style sheet. Now this static represents that static directory that we are using at the very top end, right? So it's going to include everything down to the static, the word static itself in our directory. So if we go back to our main.styles, we need to give it the path from styles on, right? So this path is included in that word static. The my site static / that's already there. We got to give it styles and then the name of the file that we want to give it in our base. So right here, we start with the word styles, because again, the static includes everything in the path up to that. And then the name of our actual file. So in our case, main-styles.css. And then we're going to close off our link tag with this little greater than symbol. Don't forget that piece on there. Very easy to forget. And notice it doesn't have a closing tag like the other ones have had with this backslash and then link. Some of them don't. This meta tag didn't either. Some of the ones in the head, they don't worry about it. That's okay. Just make sure you remember this little closing tag right here. All right, so the last piece we need on this to make it start working, it's not the last piece, the last thing we need to write into this file, is this tag right here, unlike URL, is not exactly built in. It's referenced in our settings. It's something that we're using, but we have to tell Django to load this when the page loads. So right up here underneath our doc type, we're going to put in another Django tag and tell it to load the static files. Now, I'm not going to try to defend Django and say that this is the absolute best way of doing all of this. It is notoriously not good at handling static files. So some of this loading and clunkiness, it is just clunky and annoying. But we got to make sure that we know what is happening. It's most important to understand what is happening, what we're plugging in and where, right? So this piece right here is loading static. It's called static because of the setting we set in our URL. And then we're going to reference that tag here, which is the path to our files. And then we're going to finish off the path to the specific sheet that we want to use. Is everyone clear on what we have done here when we add our link and our load static? Any questions about this before we try it out?
So pretty much load static at the top is like importing, like in Python.
Kind of, yeah, but specifically for static files. Yeah, it's kind of like an import, but it's to handle these types of files, like our CSS, JavaScript, and those sorts of things.
Also, if somehow we change the name of the directory to, for example, static one, should we
Mhm.
say load static one instead of just static?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So, um, yeah, you probably would need to make sure that it matches the name of the directory that you made in the last step and the setting in the UR in the settings.py file. As long as those are consistently used, then
Okay.
it doesn't really matter what you call them. But again, I'll warn against getting fancy with this part of it because it's really standard and it's like following standards is good because then you don't have to go back and look it up and you remember what it's called because it's called static every time. And then, name your style sheet something different. And then that's where the kind of creativity can come, I guess.
Okay.
But good question. Any other questions?
Can you show the main style.css file?
The main styles.css. I can. I remember what tab I'm on. So this should just have our main background ID definition and our green background class definition. I said I was going to make these not messed up, and then I didn't. That's
So
all it's
you
in here.
took out the body part, right?
Yep. Yeah, I replaced this. So it did say body here before, and I made this a class tag instead so that we could put it on our buttons, on both of our buttons individually, instead of just calling the body tag by itself. So there's no body anymore. It's now dot green background as a class. All right, so the last piece we need to do, now we've moved this over here. So the last thing we need to do, and if you recall, we did this before, when you go back to our bash console, we've saved everything, right? So go back to our bash console, and what we need to run here, let me actually make this just a bit smaller. Let's try running, I'm going to run this tree command that we did before, just to show here our file structure right now. And if you remember, this is the ignore pattern. So we're going to ignore our PyCache stuff. We're going to ignore our JS, any JavaScript stuff, CSS stuff, and im stuff, because that's just going to be too much. All right, cool. So if you recall that we set our static main is the place where our admin static things were. When we did collect static before, we made this directory, and this admin directory showed up inside of it, and our admin panel started looking a lot better, right? What we're going to do now is we're going to run collect static again. And what that is going to do is going to go to our settings.py file. It's going to find the static URL, or sorry, static root, which we set to static. And it is then going to go into our project directory and look for every directory named static. And it's going to take everything in those directories. So in this case, styles and main styles.css, and it's going to copy it in here into static main. That's what collect static does. It goes to all the individual static directories, copies just the contents into static main. And the reason it does this is that when the website loads, the browser is just going to come to one spot, to just static main. And that's going to save it a lot of time and compute power instead of having to traverse your entire structure, because again, you have static files and directories. We're going to make some within our to-do app. Each app will have their own static sets and stuff like that. It'll get really big. It's a lot faster to compile it down into one thing. But again, Django is not the best at handling static files. There's probably slicker ways to do this. So any questions about that before we run our collect static now? Any preliminary questions before we put this in action and see it run? All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to run collect static. We're going to expect it to take styles with its contents and put it under the static main so that it can be served at a runtime. So I'm going to clear this up. I'm going to run our command. So we've saved all our files. We're ready to rock here. We're going to do Python 3, go through our entry point in manage.py, and run collect static, all one word, all lowercase. When we do this, it gives us this little warning that says you have requested collect static files at the destination location as specified in your settings, which is the static _ main directory. This will overwrite existing files. Are you sure you want to do this? Type yes to cancel, right? So we're going to type yes because we do want to do this. And it's only going to overwrite any new or changed files. So the admin stuff that's already there, it's going to leave it alone. and it's just look for any new files. We expect there to be one, which there is, one static file copied. Two, it doesn't say where it's copied from, but it says it's copied to here. It's our file. That's what we expected. But then it said how many files were unmodified. So there's all the stuff that came in the admin panel built in. So I'm gonna clear this up and I'm gonna show you real fast before we test this to make sure that it didn't break. I'm just gonna hit the up arrow to get back to my tree command and look once again at our current file structure. And now if we look at our static underscore main directory, we have a styles subdirectory with our main styles.css inside of it. All right, so now we've done all those. I'm gonna reload pretty much on any one of these pages, our certain code. So make sure that it's got the latest. Now I come back here. You remember I moved everything out and I ran this again with none of the styles. So we've reconnected our styles through our base to reference our style sheet that's external. It's a CSS file. We've pulled it through our static. We've done collect static. Now it should give us back our styles when we come in here. And there it is. So now we have our beautiful looking homepage, which is exactly how we designed it because we're very good designers. We have our beautiful green backgrounds and our navigation still works. We have our blue background. Most importantly, though, we have our CSS out in a separate file, and we collected our static files into our one main spot to be served on our site. Any questions about this?
I got a question.
Okay.
Somehow my website is not loading the color. It runs fine without the error, but it's not loading the color.
It's not loading any colors?
No.
Okay.
Can I see your base?
Yeah.
Um,
And you ran collect static, and there was no problems when you ran this?
Yeah. So when I collect static,
Yeah.
it was not the same as your screen. It
Uh-oh.
prints like a bunch of like different random, like pretty much it says I found another file with the destination path with admin/js/vendor. I guess I have multiple different files already existing somehow.
Uh-oh.
But
All right.
when I run the tree, it created the style under the static main. So that I think that should work fine.
Okay. We can also, if you're really jammed up, if you want to hang out for a few minutes after, I can dig into your specific thing and look at it if you like and try to help debug.
Yeah.
Anybody else though? General questions? Stuck somewhere? Maybe I can point you in the right direction quickly.
I don't have any questions, but I do want to say that I've been super quiet today because I'm behind and I
Wow.
need to get caught up. And yeah. So.
Okay. That's fair. And that's, no problem. There's some time between now and next time. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be expanding on this again and doing some more stuff from here. So get to the point that you have pages. You've got your about and your homepage.
Mhm.
Most importantly, the homepage. Like get that part set up.
I'm almost there.
Cool.
I'm almost there. I just didn't make it all the way through that exercise.
Yeah. So yeah, don't sweat it if you're a little bit behind either. And also, like, if you get stuck between classes, reach out. I'm happy to set up some time to help debug, or I can just look in on Python Anywhere on my side and maybe give you some help.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. So if no other questions, then anybody that doesn't want to hang out and debug stuff can drop off, and I will send out the recording documentation like always, and we'll see you Thursday.
Thank you. Have a good night. Take care, everyone.
Have a good night.
Good night. I'm gonna stay in case I hear something that I can learn be useful.
Okay. Sure. Yeah, you're more than welcome to. All right, Alex. Cool, man. So let's see. You want me to hop over into your instance and just have a look and see what I can see?
So yeah, I was able to load the main background color.
Okay.
But then remember how you change your home to green? Home button to green? Yeah. How did you change the button again?
Okay. I keep closing the most relevant page to show exactly what you're asking me. Hold on 1 second. Let me get back to it. So in our base, .html. So we just put the class of green background inside of this string right next to button.
Green background.
Mhm. And that's what I named green background in the let's do this. Sorry, one level up. In our main styles.css, the green background definition is this class definition right here. So I'm just taking this name without the dot. So make sure that you don't have a dot when you use it in your base. So just green dash background inside of this string for the class call.
Oh, maybe I put the dot one on the top of the main background. Does that matter?
You mean
On the main style, the CSS file, I put, you see how you have like main background and then under you got the dot green background?
it shouldn't matter. No, as long as you have like the order here, it shouldn't really matter because these don't like conflict with each other in any way. But make sure that you've got all your closing tags and all that stuff and everything where it's supposed to be. You want me to hop over and have a look?
Yeah.
All right. So this is you, right? Okay, files. So my site. Then first I'm gonna check your static style, so main style CSS. All right. So you've got red background class. Cool. And templates. Base.html. Oh, you see what you did wrong? Do you see what you did wrong? I'm looking at it. Do you see it?
No.
Look right here.
Oh, I misspelled it, right?
Just one slight
Background.
misspelling. Yeah. Just that you missed letter U, looks like.
Oh
So
my God.
yeah. So
let me try to run it again.
Yeah, try fixing that and run that again, see if it works.
Oh yeah, it works.
Nice. Nice. Yeah. So I figured when you said that you just couldn't see the color, but it wasn't giving you an error, that it was something in the class reference. Right. So that's what I was checking. I was checking in your CSS file what the class was called to make sure that it was spelled exactly the same way in that file and in the way you referenced it. So that's what I looked for.
Cool. All right, everything works now.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, can I ask you like one question? It's not about this class though.
Yeah, sure. Let me stop the video and I'll stop sharing and then you can absolutely ask me whatever you like. Hold on, let me stop this recording.